So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. It's something that's just been sitting in my mind. I've been studying the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, his meditations. They're brilliant, by the way. I highly recommend them. But it's really forced me to look at life differently. And you know, when you learn a new skill or you understand something you've never understood before, once you've learned it and understood it, you can't unlearn it. You can't ununderstand it, right? It's like when you see something, you can't unsee it. So hear me out. The concept of insurance. So insurance is the only product slash service that you will receive. You will only receive it when the worst case scenario happens to you. So it only comes into existence when the worst case scenario has happened. So basically, you are paying for the possibility of a worst case scenario every month, but you'll never see that product or service unless that worst case scenario happens. And I was like, that is crazy. And then it got me thinking, why aren't we spending that same amount of time, energy, and money, I mean, thousands every month, on planning and preparing for the best case scenario? Because when it comes to outcomes, there are endless possibilities of outcomes to any scenario. But when it comes to a good or a bad outcome, it's always 50-50, always. And I know people will look at the world today and be like, oh, the world is in such a mess. It's definitely going to be, the worst case scenario is more likely. Not true. Where you focus your time and energy is where your life will naturally gravitate towards. And the reason why I always think it's going to be the worst case scenario is because we've been fed all the possible bad things that are happening in the world right now. If you look at media and politics, they only focus on the worst case scenario. And the reason why is because we start to get conditioned to believe that only bad things can happen and there's only bad things in the world. And then we start to live our life out of fear and we start to base our decisions out of fear. But guess what? There are equal good things that are happening, but we just don't see them. And if you started to live your life out of knowing that good will happen and not making decisions out of fear, you're making decisions out of confidence, your life would be a lot different. And I just think it's crazy that that is how the world is living right now. I mean, health insurance is such a good example. Medical aid, I mean, it's astronomical. People pay thousands and thousands every month for the possible worst case scenario, heart disease, cancer, you name it, right? But they're not prepared to invest that same amount of money and time, because you're working a job to be able to pay that amount of money, right? They're not prepared to do the same to invest in the best outcome for their body. And some people will stay in a job or career that they absolutely hate. It's like crazy stressful. And they will do it just so that they can pay all these insurance bills for the worst case scenario. And there's a possibility they will reach the end of their life and that worst case scenario never happened. Yet they spent all that time and energy and focus and money on the possibility of happening, and it never happened, where they could have spent all of that on living and planning and creating an amazing life for themselves and living an amazing life. So I'm not saying don't plan for the worst. I mean, yes, have insurance, but be prepared to spend the same amount of time and energy and money on building the best and focusing on the best. And it's not about living with your head in the sand and pretending that the world is fairies and dust and unicorns. It's not. There is shit happening in the world, and that's reality. But you can acknowledge it, but you can still focus on making sure that your life becomes the best version. Because when you're living your best life and achieving the best that you can, it affects everyone else around you. But if you constantly focus on the negative and you're stressed out and you're worried, and it affects everyone around you and it affects your entire life. Anyway, it got me thinking, like, insurance is a crazy thing. You only receive it when the worst case scenarios happen to you. It's nuts. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts.